It is the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener Radio Show on 860 AM WNOV and W293CX 106.5, wherever you may be listening, however you may be listening. Whether through those particular stations, the TuneIn app, the Simple Radio app, the radio tab on the WisconsinVegetableGardener.com website, or anywhere in between. I am your host, Joy Barrett. Beside me is my wife, co-host, best friend, and gardening partner,
Holly Baird.
The WisconsinVegetableGardener.com is your destination for all things gardening. Over 900 how-to garden videos, short, long format, as well as in-studio videos of this radio program, as well as podcasts, and that can all be found on the radio tab and the highlight tab on the right-hand side. I'm going to cover this topic of alternatives to all-purpose flour.
Now, with that being said, I'm not going to say that I do not bake with all-purpose flour.
We have all-purpose flour in the house
because I do. And there's reasons for that. One is that there's many things that you can bake very nicely with all-purpose flour, like a traditional cake and different breads and things. However, there are benefits to using other flours as well, and reasons to incorporate them into your baking or cooking or whatnot. So one is whole grain flours. So this would include things like whole wheat flours, oat flours, pretty much anything that's whole grain. You can find whole grain pastry flour if you want to play around with that.
They are available in the city at stores.
Right.
I mean, these are not specialty order items.
Right.
You can find them at the grocery store.
Yeah, you can find them. Sometimes you have to go to the more organic section, but most of the time a lot of these are in the baking section as well.
Now, with your whole grains, that's a very large gamut of options there. So why would one choose a whole grain flour versus an all-purpose flour?
Well, the whole grain is going to give you more fiber. It's going to be white flour typically will go through your system pretty fast.
Well, is it white flour or all-purpose flour? Isn't that a bleached product?
It's bleached. There's unbleached all-purpose flour,
okay.
But then there is bleached purpose flour.
And some people think
flour.
that bleaching hurts some of the human consumption. It's not good for the body.
That's correct. So that's something to keep in mind is the whole grain flours. Those are good for you. If you bake your own bread, that's definitely an option. If you wanted to try like a whole grain pastry flour for some of your more pastries, your sweeter things, and you can try that as well. And
we've done this, and if you didn't know, you really wouldn't say, oh, well, this is not all-purpose flour. This has a different... There's a slight taste, but, I mean, really it adds better flavor to the item that you're baking or cooking with.
Right.
It's not that bland, pretty... I mean, all-purpose flour has, like, no flavor at all.
Right.
It's just plain. It's just a filler.
Right. That's why, like, cakes taste good, because you're just basically tasting, like, the sugar and whatever else.
But the flavor of
whatever the cake is, or whatever you're making with all-purpose flour. So that is the whole grain flour. Now I want to get into gluten-free. And
okay, can we describe what gluten is? Because a lot of people hear gluten-free this, gluten-free. What is gluten to begin with?
Gluten is a protein that's found in wheat and some other grains, but it's mostly wheat. And many people do have a sensitivity to it. There's a legit disease called celiac disease that people have to not have gluten, and if they do have gluten, they get very sick. And
now, is gluten a new thing?
No, gluten's been around for a long time.
But
now a lot of people think that they don't need gluten and whatnot. But I'm going to touch on that because a lot of people are like, hey, I choose to be gluten-free, no matter what their reasoning is.
Do you know the science behind what happens to your body when you eat gluten?
No, I'm not a celiac doctor.
Oh, you're not a celiac.
No.
I'll adjust. But anyway, people have effects when they eat this gluten.
They say that if you feel that, okay, like for example, I have an illness called PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and many people feel that if you cut gluten out of your life, that would make you alleviate some of the symptoms. I've never tried it, but if you ever do have curiosities, you can do your own research, speak with your doctor, whatever you want to do. But with that being said, gluten-free includes flours that are grains that don't contain gluten. So there's oat flours, but some oats are grown in a way that they kind of crossbreed with the wheat type of thing, where they could possibly have gluten in them. So you have to look for gluten-free oat flour.
Okay.
Sorghum grain is naturally gluten-free. Corn's gluten-free. Rice is gluten-free.
If you go with a non-GMO.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Well, yeah. So
goes without saying.
Right. So that is something that you can definitely look into baking with. You usually have to add more things because that protein, that gluten protein, is what gives the flour that elasticity. So
Which
like,
you have to add something to substitute that gluten that's missing to make everything go together, or do the chemistry in the cake or baking.
right. So you want to keep that in mind, that you have to add, like, usually it's like xanthan gum or more eggs, or I don't know. You have to look at recipes. So that's typically the most too, but you'll get a lot of like more. It's more crumbly usually. Like sometimes I make that one almond flour,
And everybody knows what that is because you're talking to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. Okay, yeah.
Anyway, so moving on.
All right, let's talk about bean flour, because maybe people don't think beans as a flour. What is that?
Well, we're going to talk about nut flours first.
Okay, let's talk about nut flour.
Okay, so nut flours and bean flours. Well, nut flours are usually going to be they're going to be lower on the carbohydrates. And that's something that I appreciate as somebody who strives to eat less carbs is a nut flour. So, for example, like almond flours, hazelnut flour, even coconut flour, it has less carbohydrates.
Okay.
So, but you can still bake with these flours, which is what's nice about them. You do have to add more eggs. For example, the waffles that I make, they are made with coconut flour, but they're also made with 8 eggs. So you are adding that protein that you're losing from some of that gluten
Protein
or the
not having,
carbohydrates. Right. So that's nut flours.
And bean flours.
Bean
here.
flours. So that's like anything like chickpea flour. That's used a lot for people. They use chickpea flour or garbanzo flour.
Right.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Realistically, you could use pretty much any type of bean flour, but that's the most common. And but nut flours and bean flours are also gluten free. So if you are striving to stay away from the gluten, that's an option.
So if you're going to bake with these flours, based on the item that you're baking or cooking, you may have to add an additional ingredient to fulfill that lack of gluten that the all-purpose flour contains.
Right.
So you have to do a little research. You just can't go with the traditional, okay, I'm going to bake a cake, substitute one for the other. There's some things you might have to additionally add to make the cake actually a cake.
Right, and it really just depends. Sometimes you can buy cake mixes or baking mixes that contain what you need.
Oh, Hodgson's Mills has gluten-free baking mixes.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have that option. You also, a lot of times you might have something that's going to be more dense. Even with whole grain, you're going to have something that might be more dense. Like I made that cornbread and I used whole grain flour, and it was definitely more dense than
But it didn't lack flavor or texture, and it really was. It was more fulfilling.
Right.
With that.
And that's the thing. It's just something to think about. There's. Everything's not so black and white, I guess.
And then you can also do things like pumpkin seed flour.
Right.
Pumpkin flour, which you actually dehydrate the pumpkin seeds, grind them up to a powdered form, or the pumpkin flesh, dehydrate it and dry it and dehydrate it and grind it up to a powdered form. Now with those, for the pumpkin flour, you have to substitute, you can only add a quarter of the pumpkin flour to the recipe. You can only use a quarter of that for, a quarter of that pumpkin flour, and then 3 cups of the all-purpose flour if you need 4 cups of something. You just can't use 100% pumpkin flour or pumpkin seed flour.
You could try.
You can try,
it might
but
be interesting.
But it doesn't work that well.
So that's the thing, is sometimes with these other flours, you do have to combine things and keep in mind what you are finding. Recipes and experimenting might be something that you would have to do.
Yeah, so just don't think all-purpose flour is a one-and-done deal. You can certainly explore, look at, do some research, and find a healthier means in order to eat healthier, bake healthier when it comes to that. And, I mean, some of these things are slightly more expensive than the all-purpose flour. Am I right on that or wrong? Or does it really matter?
Yeah, they are. Sometimes they are. And so you can look for sales, or you can buy, a lot of times, like, certain stores you can buy, they have a bulk section, so if you want to try something, but you
don't have to buy 5 pounds.
You don't have to buy 5 pounds, right.
If you're in the Milwaukee or surrounding areas, just tune your radio to 860 AM or FM 106.5. You can also find links on our Facebook pages, The Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener and Home Canning. Our website, thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com, click on the radio tab at the top of the page, then click on the Listen Live button, and you'll have immediately access to our live program. Mobile devices work very well also. Go to your app store and download for free the TuneIn app or the Simple Radio app. Then search WNOV 860, save it to your favorites, and you can have access to our radio show live wherever you're at in the world. Our radio program will also have podcast replay under the radio tab several days following the live broadcast. You can find all of these links in the show notes below. Our show airs 9 to 10 a.m. Central Standard Time every Saturday, March through the end of October. And we want to thank our sponsors because without them, this would not be anywhere possible. You can find all of their links under the radio tab on our website at thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.